So one thing at ZoeInsights, our vision is a world where every person is connected to their data, the resources, and community, and knowledge they need to live their best possible life. We don't focus on helping you through a disease. It's more so helping you optimize your health and then live the best quality of life. And a part of that is uh, coming up with these webinars. And a lot of these webinars are coming from my personal experience or those of others that I've talked to as a patient advocate. And a bit about my background. So I was a caregiver to my late wife. She was diagnosed with late stage cancer, lung cancer at 36, and she lived over 5 years. And so she became an outlier. And part of that was because of um, the access to the community and information we received in order to help make decisions. Now, um, one of the key things which we wanted to do was make sure she had a high quality of life throughout that journey, and she was able to spend time with loved ones. We traveled to about 8 countries. These are photos of her painting. Uh, that's what she focused her time on, and she found her calling to empower people to take charge of their health, and we've um, grown from that into ZoeInsights. But that's the premise of ZoeInsights. And um, part of my journey is as a caregiver, I became a patient advocate. And my background is in computer engineering and software. And talking to Corey Capser, his background, he's the co-founder of the company. His background is in software engineering. And um, what we found and what I found going through this is that a lot of people are using a variety of technology to capture the information, find a community, and there's a big catalyst now with the internet to be able to find people who are just like you and start to have conversations. I mean, it's almost self-evident given all the social media platforms. But part of my journey as an advocate is I give talks at different conferences, and I'm also working with several patient organizations on a declaration of rights, rights to your data, rights to be engaged in shape of our healthcare system. And so that takes on many forms, but these are some of the conferences I've been to where I spoke. Coming back to my wife's journey, um, so the 5-year survival rate of metastasized lung cancer is less than 2%. She survived almost 5 years. And so that posed the question by clinicians of what we were doing to live that long and to have that quality of life. And so a lot of that goes to the credit of the community of people who have gone through this journey or they're one step ahead. Those are the people who I define as a community. Right? It's people who are exactly like you, um, who could act as a coach, who have probably made mistakes or lessons learned, which allows you not to repeat them. And when you're talking about your health, if you could take those lessons learned and apply it, that's golden. And so that's what we found with the community. And I'll go through as there's a question in terms of talking to the clinicians about the information you get and how do you do that. So I'll talk a bit about that because we did have the community influence us quite a bit in our journey. So this webinar is the second webinar of a 3-part series. And the first one, we talked about data, capturing your data, how to ask for your data, and the benefits of it. That recording is available on our website as one of our webinars, and this one will be as well. And this one, as mentioned, it focuses on the decisions you have to make based on community information. And as you progress to become an outlier, one thing I want to share is that your health knowledge increases, but also there's a decrease in privacy. And you'll see it in some of the examples I give where people are really sharing their stories, sharing their diagnosis, and they're doing that because they're authentic. They want to express really what's happening, but also it gives you validation that what they're going through is similar to yours, so you could trust their information. And obviously, as you move forward and to become an outlier, making decisions from the crowd has its own risks. So the question is, how do you validate that information? And it circles back to the question is like, well, the best way to validate that is to have a trust with your care team, and making sure your care team understands where you're getting this information and how it's influencing your decisions. So it's not a science, it's an art, because the variable is a practitioner and a clinician. And how do you find a clinician that will trust you and your decision making? So part of the first webinar talks about collecting your data, and this is a precursor to going to community. And so this is the examples of how we collected our information. It was very analog. And that's because often the system is very analog. In order to get your reports, they give you paper handouts. Sometimes you can get them from the patient portal, but often you can't download them, and they're not complete. And that's because the system is quite fragmented. So what we found, and I encourage, is start collecting your information in a binder or virtual binder such that it stays with you. The other thing which we were doing is taking notes. And this is important because when we were starting to have conversations with the community, we wanted it to be accurate and we wanted to contribute back. And so we could always refer to our diaries. The other pictures here just depict the CDs of the MRIs, and that was we just always kept those MRIs and CDs. The other thing here we have on the right is graphs. So what we found with our group, we had a circle of 50 people, and they all had the same diagnosis. And what we started doing is we started analyzing each other's data. In essence, we became citizen scientists. So this graph here is a CEA, which is a tumor marker. And it just shows her tumor marker, which is a blood test, over time. And when we started sharing this, we told people that this is a correlation and this is our story, that why we started tracking this, and that gave confidence to others in the community to track it themselves. And this was also transparent with our doctor, because what we found, our oncologist was tracking this as themselves, but they can produce a graph. They just didn't have time to see the longitudinal data. They were looking at one data point. So when we found out that we could do that homework for him, we were plotting this, and what it shows is a uptick in the markers. So what that represent was progression. And we found the progression before the symptoms started, which gave us a lot more runway to find another treatment. Gave us peace of mind that there's progression, pain hasn't started, and it's small. And so that's vital. Peace of mind puts your body into a parasympathetic mode, which helps you heal. So you could really map your data and your community back to healing. So what we're going to do throughout this webinar is just be engaged with you, and we're curious to know how you track your information. And the reason that's important is because, as mentioning, when you track your information, then it's easier to tell your story to others in the community and have that dialogue. So I'm just going to take a break here and let Kathy and Ann send a poll out. And there's different modalities that we've seen. We were just curious from people of current state, how do they track their data? I could see the screen or the results.
Okay.
Maybe I could slide the results over here so people see it in real time as people answer. Is it live, Catherine?
It is. It looks like almost everyone has answered. We'll just give it a couple more seconds if you want to get your votes in. All right. So we're going to end the poll. And I believe you guys should be able to see the results right now.
Can everybody see that?
Someone just wants to put a yes in the chat. Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. So what we see here, I'll just slide this over here. A lot of people go to patient portals to collect their data, which is great. But what I think is important is what's called patient reported outcomes. So it's like, what are you experiencing versus the test that you get? But the patient portals are really good. Mobile phone is a common. We did that. Paper is also paper and memory is actually the most common way. When we researched studies, they found that about 34% use paper and about 49% use memory in general in the population to track their health. And it's great to see some people are using ZoeInsights. And the purpose of ZoeInsights is to provide a consolidated source or one central spot for your data collection, which then you could use as a reference when you talk to your community. So I'm going to go and talk a bit about some disruptors. And there's two disruptors. First is the democratization of knowledge. So this is a bit of the theory and going to the crowd. The basically, it's because of the internet, and we have about almost 5 billion people on the internet, is we have a tool now that civilization has never had where we could communicate with virtually anybody in the world. And the democratization of knowledge is a spread of this knowledge that could come from any source, be it the public people or experts, medical experts, academics, and that can be shared with anybody virtually instantaneously and almost free. And that's revolutionary. If you look at it 25 years ago, people who attend a medical conference wouldn't be able to communicate that information out beyond the conference attendees. And now, especially with COVID, people are streaming this information. I'm actually attending the POET, which is a precision oncology conference. And it was in person last year. Now it's fully virtual, and you could stream that information. So that's a medical conference being streamed and available to the public to come. So you have the ability to get that information, and that's part of the democratization, that it's available for everybody. Now, I'm coming back to one thing I explained in the first webinar, and that is basically learning your own medical profile and your health history and understanding the terminology. And that's important because if you want to greater knowledge you have your health, it's known to improve outcomes because you're more engaged. And this is of course important when you're in the community. And when we found, this is basically my wife's profile, her cancer diagnosis, I mean, this is very precise, but also the therapies which she's on. And so this is important to us because when we looked for a community, we looked for people who are identical to her, and we found them around the world. We've found very few in Canada, being a young adult with that metastasized cancer, but around the world, we found quite a few. And we found the trends. We found that for her, that stage 4 lung cancer is in that EGFR positive is typically young women that are fit and non-smokers. And that's who we connected with primarily. So it's important to, when you go to your community, understand your own health and your disease profile, because that's very important to validate others, because often they're going to go through the same journey, and this is a validation that what they're saying is credible. So a bit about sources of knowledge. Where do we go for the crowd? And the first thing we did is we went to the bloggers. right? The assumption here is you've gone to your center, your physician, and gathered information. But what we found is that information could be stale or sterilized, and there's reasons for why it's sterilized, because it has to be their how to say this, their responsibility is quite frankly a bit different than the general public. But in order to get updated current information, what we found is we had to go to the internet, and bloggers were one area where we went, because we found the bloggers who would be basically narrating their story as they got their treatments. And based on those treatments and the side effects they talked about, we were more informed, which made us more comfortable and reduced our worry. The next level, I would say, is PubMed. So these are published journals, published articles in medical journals, and it was a great way to validate a lot of the information that we received. What we found is when you're diagnosed with a disease, especially something that's critical, is the family wants to help, right? They're the first people who start giving you information. And what I found as a caregiver is that it's my responsibility to filter that out, to validate it. And that took a lot of work. In fact, I would say for every article we got, the easiest part is to forward it to us, right? Our family member would see something, just send it to us. That's 5% of the work. 95% of the work is to validate that this is practical, and how do you bring this up with your practitioner? And so how do you bring it up to the practitioner? What we did is we would look at these articles, look at the information, go to PubMed and look at published articles. So when we had that conversation with our clinician, we could support it with information that I would say they respect. So and I'll tell you a bit of another story, is because in my wife's journey, she started taking high dose vitamin C, right? Which is IV, really. It's IV, it's 30 grams. It's very, very large. Now, when I share these stories, I'm not advocating for any of these modalities. I just want to share the experience. But what we found is we got pushback from the cancer center saying you should not be doing this, and we wondered why. And so what we were able to do is go into PubMed and find out information on this, because our naturopath was telling us about this. And so, there's a different schools of thought between naturopaths and conventional medicine. Fair enough. But what we did then is we actually got a second consult of an oncologist in the States, and he provided us with the articles, the PubMed articles, saying this is the Harvard reviews on this procedures. And we were able to go to our oncologist and with that information say, we are looking at this, we are being transparent, it's a matter of trust, but this is one thing which we're going to be planning to do. And we fortunately had the support of our oncologist. Not every medical practitioner will be supportive. That's something that it'll be hard to change, but it's something that you have to factor in terms of staying with them or forming your own opinion. The next, which I talked about, level, I say, of engagement in the community is medical conferences. And so a lot of medical conferences open up to patients, caregivers, and they're very receptive of it. So it's something that I encourage, if you really want to become a patient advocate, is attend the conferences, because you find a network of other peers who are actively engaged. The other thing is a lot of them fund you, or they sponsor and they have scholarships to attend. That's very common. Maybe I'll take a break here, and in the chat, anybody want to share their ideas of sources of knowledge? I'm just curious about what other people use in order to learn about their healthcare or their health condition. I'll just see if there's anybody who wants to share that.
You have a poll that we could do now to get
Mhm.
the conversation started. So I'm gonna launch this as well.
Yeah. Maybe
Um,
easier. The poll might be easier.
yeah. Looks like there's Facebook groups, books.
Yeah, I didn't put other there, but hmm. There's one person mentioned practice updates. Can you expand on that? I'm just curious. I don't know what that means. Health summits is another one.
If someone is comfortable speaking with their mic on, just raise your hand again and I can do that. Or you guys can keep chatting in the chat on the side.
Catherine, can people see the chat?
Yeah. Or
Okay.
if you're responding and you would like everyone to see it, you can change who you're sending it to and a drop down would come up. So you can either send it to all panelists or panelists and attendees. So some, let's say all panelists are just coming to you and I, Shaneel.
Okay.
So we can read those aloud.
Yeah. So there's quite a few.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll go through this list after we finish the poll. Oh, where did the poll go?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and share the results. Looks like we had most people voting.
Yeah. Friends and family, patient organizations. Yeah. Google. Yeah. When I say Google, I define Google as like any source. Like they're just Googling the information. Oh yeah, there's PubMed and conferences. That's great. Okay. I'll just continue on.
I guess I can stop sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, so coming back to kind of the three that I've mentioned, which is the bloggers. This is an example of a blog. It's pretty straightforward, and I think when in order to validate information, because that's part of trusting, it's even on Google, right? That's a very popular. It's like, how do you validate your information? And so what I liked about this blog is they talked about the medication, the gene mutation, a bit about the history, the type of test that they're going through. And so if that journey matches yours, there's more credibility to this blogger. The other thing they had was they had an award for one of the best bloggers. So what we found is even in some patient organizations, they actually list bloggers who are pretty active. And so then again, you get some credibility because it's a patient organization that has validated that. So it's and then the other thing is you'll see how many people have linked to their blog is another way of indication. So it's like these skills are just important in general to validate information on the internet. And a good way is to look at how does that how does their story compare to your story, right? Especially their history. PubMed, I talked about. It's free for everybody, and you can do a search, a keyword search, and you can start getting information. the downfall of PubMed is I find that you could probably find answers to many things, and that could be a slippery slope. So it's just it's a reference to validate, but you need multiple sources. So I talked about, the vitamin C. It's a not, you'll find, what I found is that there's so much publications out there that you might even find the answer that you're looking for, which is, how do you say it? It's self-validating, and you're not being objective. And this is why PubMed is one of many ways of validating the community's information in order to help you make a decision.
Shaneel, there's a question in the
Mm-hmm.
Q&A. So did you find differences from country to country on how your wife's type of cancer was treated?
100%. And I would say it's not just cancer. It could be MS. It could be various chronic diseases. 100%. In fact, we have a clinical trial for Fabry disease, and the physician, physician and researcher wants to expand that outside of Canada to the United States as well as Europe. And the reason is with ZoeInsights, they can collect patient data, patient-reported outcome data, right? And the reason he wants to expand it out is because he knows that there's different drugs used in different countries and different modalities because the way they're insured, and so the outcomes could be different. But it's not practical to do a clinical study on that. So, and this is what we found is not just the medications, but even tests are different. So a specific example is at Tom Baker for my wife's profile, when we wanted to do monitor, because brain metastasis is very highly probable with lung cancer. And so we wanted to have scans done. And the standard of care at Tom Baker was CT scans. And it was reactive. It's if there's a symptom or no symptom, they'll do a CT scan to validate. We didn't like the reactive approach. And so it was people in Germany and also the States at Dana-Farber, they said, like, we're treated here at these centers, and the standard of care is MRIs. And then we started finding out why do they do MRIs, why do we do CT scans? And they basically explained MRIs are more accurate for that profile. And so we went to Tom Baker and we pushed and advocated, saying we want an MRI. They're doing it at these centers. This is the why they're doing it. And when you challenge, it's a challenge, but when you articulate it in terms that they understand, and it's hard for them to challenge that clinically, then it opens up a dialogue of why they use CT scans. At the end result is that we got the MRIs that we wanted, but we had to fight for it. And sadly, that's what you have to do sometimes. And saying, I think this is part human dynamics, or maybe organizational behavior. But if you could tell a top-notch cancer center is doing a particular procedure that's almost common in many countries, or if not the country, you have a better chance of getting it approved, or at least having your voice listened to. And the benefit of the crowd, and I'll go into this, is you're not the crowd allows you to peer into the treatment center of that country. That's what you're looking for, right? It wasn't the person who had cancer telling me do an MRI. It was, no, my oncologist has done this, this, and this. And that's what we take back to our clinician. So it becomes one clinician has said, this is what they do. Why aren't you doing it? And you separate the bias of a patient, and you look at the medical information as a way of convincing your home practice to follow that. Sorry, it's a long-winded question, but I do share my stories. Is there? So I'm just looking at if there's any other questions here. There's a question about getting the full article through your cancer clinic. I'm not I'm not sure. Getting the full article is hard. What we did is we would go to PubMed. Sometimes they would give the abstract, and then I would copy and paste the title and the journal and Google that, and you'll find somebody, especially the author, has posted it. So if you want to get the actual article, rather than reaching out to your center, reach out to the researcher, because I think the researcher would be more than welcome to giving you their PDF, because they want to share their research. So that's who I would go to, is a researcher, to get the full article. So this slide here talks a bit about the medical conferences, and what how I mentioned is that there's a big encouragement. This is the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and they're looking at patient inclusion. I've been to conferences where they actually have organized events for patients. They have a lounge for them because some people are going through treatment, so they have some quiet space. So they're very accommodating to patients and caregivers to participate. Financially, there's scholarships or it's free, and they, as I was saying, they have travel vouchers as well. So we talked about the democratization of data. So that is about the crowd of people being able to share their information, and that's anybody from expertise to academics to the members of the public. Crowdsourcing is to be able to aggregate that information and experiences and then provide answers to solve a problem. And the reason why I think crowdsourcing is becoming a much bigger topic and more important is because the rate of knowledge growth. So medical knowledge doubles every 72 days. It is impossible for a practitioner to stay up to date with the advancements of research and treatments. And so it's come to a paradigm shift where the care team has to listen and to the patient or the person and have them involved, because often it's the person who has the vested interest in learning, and they become very, very much consumed in spending time in learning the disease and learning the challenges, and they become experts in their own right. So coming back with the rate of increase, 72 days, this wasn't the case even in the 1980s or 1950s. Right? When our healthcare in Canada, when our healthcare system was designed in the 60s, medical knowledge doubled every 50 years. It could remain static. Frankly, I think it has remained static because back then the pace of change didn't occur. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have that access to the data. In 1980s, it was 7 years. It was doubling, and now it's 72 days. So just food for thought. Crowdsourcing itself is not new. This is Dave. He has a great TED Talk. He was diagnosed in 2007 with stage 4 renal carcinoma. He was told you'll have a few months to live, and then he turned to patients online and found the medical treatment, and he's alive today. So he narrates his story. And so my wife's journey about she was given months to live and she lived over 5 years. It's not new. Outliers are doing it, and they're relying on people in order to influence their decision. So two things that resonated with me is he says, give healthcare data directly to patients. So he's a big advocate for that, and so am I. And the other is let patients help heal healthcare. And that too resonated with me. So I'm just doing a time check because I want to spend time, allow time for people to ask questions. So the remainder are kind of examples. So I will just briefly go through them. But there was an initial question about how do you engage your clinical team with the information you receive? And I come to this slide here because what we did is my wife had a decision between whole brain radiation or a targeted drug. The data on the targeted drug wasn't there if it passed the blood-brain barrier, so we didn't know if it would work. And what we did is we actually did a poll, not a poll, it was actually did our own research. We contacted 60 patients who had the exact same profile as my wife around the world who were on the clinical trial. And that's key, right? It wasn't just like they were on the clinical trial and they just gave us their data. They gave us their reports. So this comes back to, why do you want to keep your reports? It's not just for you, it's for others. And we were able to go through these MRI scans and communicate with the patients about their experience. I mean, we took it to the next step where this got published in the Journal of Thoracic Oncology, but it's a methodology from collecting this information from your crowdsource and your peers, structuring it and analyzing it. And what we found is that majority of the people did well on the drug and didn't do whole brain radiation. So we took this information, we collected it and summarized it into a page and presented to our oncologists and saying, we're ready to take the risk. And that's the key thing, I think, is that when you present yourself to your practitioner that you're knowledgeable and you're aware of the risks, it gives them, I would say, peace of mind, because I think that's what they worry about. It's like, do you really understand what your decisions and the implications are? And if you could tell that story, you get the credibility. And we told them, we don't want to say no to whole brain radiation, right? Their suggestion is always an option, but we just want some time to see if this works and we understand the risk. That was the story we presented. And for my wife, it worked out well. Within a month of taking the drug, the brain metastasis, 64 brain mets got, was a full response. It got cleared. She didn't have to do whole brain radiation. And within 2 months, we were in Bali. She had no neurological impacts. Quality of life was good. And that's because of that drug, but also because of that decision. And that decision came from mining the data on the internet from our crowd. Other places to source information. I reference Inspire, which is has several discussion groups on a variety of medical conditions. And I chose here cancer, but any chronic disease, like, it could be rare, like Fabry, Mito, it could be MS, and you'll see groups there and they have a lot of conversations. And so just to ask, where do you find people? Inspire was great. How do you validate them? Well, you can see how much discussion that are occurring. So it's very chatty. So the crowd itself will filter things that are wrong. So you can start reading that. And also you can see people put in their profile, right? And so if you look at this profile of a person, I mean, they're very open to who they are. You see their diagnosis, and then you see the treatment plan. And if you have this diagnosis and you see the treatment plan, and if it's similar to yours, then you have some credibility. Then the question is, what have they done when, if they're past your journey or in the future? And that's the information you're looking for, is like, what's my next step in case something goes wrong? How do I handle this and the side effects, given that I have kids or have responsibilities at work? This stuff you're not going to get through your cancer center. It's using the people to help you. I talked about outliers, search for peers. So that study that we did, which is basically very brief, that data was sourced from people around the world who had the same profile as my wife. And on the bottom right-hand corner, we found people in the same age group, same therapy lines. Just quickly, when you go to the crowd, what are we finding? We talked about treatment options based on your mutation results. So a lot of genetic and also cancers, they look at the DNA. And so different countries are approving drugs at different rates and so you want to find out what's out there in terms of treatment options, and that's a lot of times coming from the crowd. This is interesting. This is a computer test that we were told. and this is why it's important to reach out of Canada. This company is based in London, Ontario. And what they do is they do computer simulation. So you give them your genetic profile of the disease, and they tell you what drugs would work best going in the future, right? So this is like for lung cancer, this is the previous treatments, this is the mutations, and then they tell you what you could do. So they tested existing drugs and combinations of it, and they presented it to you. And this is the computer system that's doing it. How we found out about this is because a colleague, a caregiver in Norway, was using it. Even though this is in Canada, we just didn't know. We're in Alberta. So this is why it's important to reach out to the world. This is additional services. I won't go through this, but this is what we found from around the world which we could use. And not everything is that expensive, like 40 euros for a particular test in France. We had a second opinion, and we were comfortable paying $250 for regular second opinions because we had a different oncologist, a different toolbox helping us. Well, I'm just looking at the questions here. Critical outcomes, is it better than being on the POET trial? Sorry, I don't understand that question. I think if you could expand a bit, I'll be able to answer that. A POET, at least from what I was referring to, a POET is a conference, precision oncology conference. But I'll come back to it if you could expand on that, and I'm happy to answer that question. So I want to conclude with a vision that we should reimagine how healthcare knowledge is dispersed and used. And the whole concept is like Uber. You know, just 5 years ago, it was so hard to get a taxi because it's basically centrally controlled, right? It's a centrally controlled system. And now with Lyft and Uber, it's distributed, right? People are connecting with each other in order to provide a service that's benefiting society. And that's where I feel where crowdsourcing will go with respect to healthcare. And that's because with healthcare, the democratization of data, crowdsourcing your peers, the advancement and how quickly it's occurring, we need a different way of looking at how do you make decisions. And this, through this webinar, is to share what some people are doing and using the crowd. A little bit on the next webinar. So the next webinar is a 3-part series, and the third one will be on how to be an outlier in your health journey. So now you found a crowd to help you collect information. Well, how do you make that and turn it into a decision? Or making sure that the decision you made is the right decision based on the information you receive. So that's what we'll talk a bit about that in the next webinar. And I want to thank everybody who attended. I think I'm just checking the time. We should have some time for questions. And I'll answer this question here. Is clinical outcome is better than being on the POET trial? POET is supposed to match you with drugs or clinical trials. In Calgary, yes. I mean, there's a precision oncology trial which is to match you with drugs and clinical trials. I'm aware of the physician. That physician that is also was my wife's physician as well, oncologist, and right. What they're trying to do is actually get a lot more precise in terms of, and more frequent in terms of testing, which allows for matching. So it is a project steered out of Calgary, and often targeted drugs in the cancer space do better than non-targeted drugs. This is also applied in other, I believe, in other with other diseases. And so the precision oncology is really getting down to being a very narrow, precise, it's personalized medicine. The challenge with personalized medicine is that you could feel alone, but you're not alone, because with 5 billion people on the internet, you're going to find people who are exactly like you, and that's where you would want to connect to. Is there any other questions?
There is one in the question box.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, in terms of the question here is research working with data. One or two. Okay, so the question is, for individuals not as comfortable as you with researching and working with data, what are one or two things you recommend everyone does to take more ownership of their health journey? That's a good question. I think the first step before you could research with data is start collecting your data and start taking notes of what your body's talking to you. So start with yourself first, and perhaps even have a caregiver take notes. But the key thing is, before you go out to the community, start with yourself, because what we find is that your body's talking to you. Your body's responding to the medications you're taking. And so find out those patterns, right? Find out when certain medications are better to take. There's a whole theory of, there's the truth is circadian rhythm, where your body has a cycle, and learn your own cycle with the medications, and then improve yourself that way first. So step one, collect your information, but more importantly, record your present day information on how you're feeling, when you took the drugs, what was the response, are you improving? Right? That in itself will be incredibly valuable for your care team. Yeah, and one of our participants talked about educating yourself and talking to peers, and that's where I mentioned this is educate yourself of yourself and your body, and then you could go to the peers. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar, and it's always this is my passion, is to share knowledge of not just mine or with others, with others, and appreciate you attending the webinar. We will have a recording that's posted, and it'll also be distributed to all the participants, but all our webinars are on our website, and you can check that out at ZoeInsights.com. And if you have any other questions, by all means, you could reach out to us through our email, info@ZoeInsights.com as well. But thank you everybody for attending.